Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 13th, 2020. Still really, I don't know. That'll be harder to get used to, I think, because of the switchover in my mind, anyway, from 2020 to 2020. And, I don't know, still a stumbling block for me. So I guess that happens into the beginning, of 2021, 22, something like that. The rough equivalent of doing it for an entire year when you're writing checks, if you are ever writing checks, if you still write checks, into January or February and putting the wrong year in it. I don't know. Anyway, plenty to catch up on, of course, as usual, although a relatively quiet weekend this weekend, but lots to talk about. I got one thing I could occupy an hour or two on. We'll see if we don't get hung up on that. But Daily Co's Radio is live now. I can tell you in the first 2 minutes or so of the show, Bill has told me that the show's live, and I should tell you, Happy Infrastructure Week again. Yeah, I guess we're on week 150, I don't know, what are we at, 156, 157, 150, something like that of Infrastructure Week. How's your infrastructure? You probably got plenty of it by now. Today, Kagro X, that's me and how you reach me on Twitter, gives you handy tips for keeping the bridges in your community from falling down, like London Bridge, using nothing but chewing gum and bubble wrap. That's right, and what an interesting combination at that. You can try it with bubble gum and chewing wrap, but I don't necessarily recommend it. It's not the most flavorful kind of wrap that I can think of. Anyhow, it's important that, and of course, by the way, one of my favorite plastic wraps that you can use, of course, bubble wrap. It doesn't taste nearly as good as the bubble gum. It never has really worked for me. Never had that talent blowing those bubbles with that stuff, but it does pop nicely, and that's even more fun. All right, let's see. This apparently is the weekend that everybody discovered how large wombats are. I don't know how that happened, but somebody tweeted around pictures of wombats, and we all expressed our amazement at how large they could actually grow. That was very interesting. I don't know if you got paralyzed this morning by watching a guy ice fishing in Kazakhstan. I don't even know how that happened. I'd like to know who's responsible for putting that in our timelines. And watching this guy spearfishing with a pitchfork on the ice in Kazakhstan and then putting out his fish to dry over an open fire. It was very, I don't know, somehow mesmerizing. It was offered up as sort of a moment of zen, a relaxing Sunday moment. It was had hung over into Monday. I don't know how relaxing it was for the fish. I imagine it was rather less than relaxing for them. But there was something very interesting in watching the simple process of him, fishing with a pitchfork. That was pretty interesting. And then salting and drying out his fish over a fire. It was interesting to watch. Kazakhstan, of course, the ancestral homeland of Borat, I guess, who I'm as we go on, it seems like he's less and less like the actual people of Kazakhstan. I think he's pulling the wool over our eyes with that one. Sacha Baron Cohen is, and I don't know. We'll bring him before the International Court of Justice, I think, before all is said and done. Probably more likely to get him there than, I don't know, let's say Donald Trump, who certainly belongs there, but no way anybody could imagine actually bringing him before a high tribunal, the kind of high tribunal that he has insisted the press is not. But we can't get him there and can't get him to answer questions anyway. The impeachment dance continues. This may or may not be the week that Nancy Pelosi clears her hold, let's say. I don't know if there's really anything like a hold, but instructs the clerk of the House of Representatives to forward on the, actually they would have to first bring a resolution naming House managers, and I guess formally speaking, they carry those articles over and display them at the bar of the Senate. You didn't even know they had a bar in the Senate, did you? But it explains a lot, doesn't it? Though I did see, I guess, the Hill trying to spark some additional controversy by saying that she was doubling down on not sending the articles. But then when you read the article about the articles, there's no doubling down. She just says what she said last week. Maybe we'll do it this week. We'll have a vote in the caucus on Tuesday. We'll meet. We'll talk about it. We'll decide what we want to do. And something. What a dictator, that Nancy Pelosi. All right. Greg Dworkin is here with us because that's what we do on Monday mornings. And you're excited to do it, I'm sure. Good morning, Greg.
What better thing to do?
Ice fishing with a pitchfork. One.
Well, I like watching other people do stuff like that from inside with a nice hot cocoa. So,
right.
That's always good.
So do the fish.
The impeachment stuff is interesting for a number of reasons. Of course, the basic one is what it means and why it's happening. And everybody sort of glosses over that these days. I saw even you had enough with Chuck Todd with the Sunday shows.
Yeah, that was pretty dumb.
Who basically asked the most narrow possible question about an enormous, far-reaching, event, which is impeachment. I mean, it's essentially the approach that a lot of reporters in Washington take, which I summed up as the burning question everybody wants to know. I understand that your actions in Iran may have started World War III, but what does this mean for the Iowa caucuses?
That's not. You say it was the worst possible. I don't think it was even a possible question. I don't know how it happened.
Right, but anyway, it happened. But you have to step back and remember that of course is the big picture. So Josh Hooter, I guess is from Brookings, had a really interesting tweet. A very short set of tweets pointing out something I think is important that people lose sight of. How long did Pelosi hold the impeachment articles?
Yeah.
And hold is in scare quotes. Right. 4 legislative days. Yeah, remember the session wasn't in session for a lot of this. They were in recess.
That. I'm the original. I don't know. I said that a long time ago, but I love right. that people are bringing that up. And all you need is a calendar to figure that out. I didn't save the world with that discovery.
And Hooter says, at this point she clearly held him, but I still refuse to believe this was a preconceived tactic aimed at a clear objective. And as soon as he said that, of course, I had flashbacks to the every year or so partial government shutdown over DACA.
Yes.
Which is a situation where you know how it starts, you know how it ends, which is to say Democrats don't have the votes in the Senate and the government will reopen. And then there's stuff in between.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's, oh, my gosh, I wonder, I should read ahead to the last chapter and find out how this mystery ends. We know how it ends. So the whole point of any of that is, if you're a cynic, posturing, and if you're a political junkie, a play for public opinion.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And as a matter of fact, that's why I always, at least several times a week, take a look at impeachment polling, which is now removal polling because he's been impeached. Mm-hmm. And, the question is, how does that look? And interestingly, the poll that never moves, our civics poll for Daily Kos, is now 52 support, 45 opposed. That's a 7-point gap and the biggest it's ever been.
Oh.
And it actually started to grow a point or two after the Iran strike.
Okay.
Whereas the MSN poll, again, different methodology, so you can't compare them, different question. Do you support or oppose the Senate removing Trump from office? That's a very stable 54 remove, 40 don't for the very stable genius. So in fact, the Democrats are winning that public opinion argument, which is the whole point of, focusing on impeachment and, making it about Nancy Pelosi and the impeachment itself rather than the Senate and a cover-up. So then the political reporters who cover this can't help themselves. Everything is a sports analogy. Is it a Hail Mary pass on Pelosi's part? Is it a TKO in the 4th round by, Mitch McConnell? And then today's effort from Politico is how Schumer might get the last laugh on impeachment trial. Democrats plan to squeeze vulnerable Republicans with a series of tough votes that could hurt them in November. And in fact, when you get to the trial and that starts to happen, of course that's the story. And that's the story all along, and it's always been that. So, again, it's just like impeachment itself, was Nancy Pelosi a genius in waiting till this moment to do it when the rest of her caucus wanted to do it 3 years ago? No, things just have to come together. And then when it comes together, you do what you need to do. And the person who's in the leadership position has to balance the cats and the chainsaws, as they like to say, and figure out what's best for her caucus to keep her caucus together. And that's what McConnell does in the Senate, and that's what Pelosi does in the House. And guess what? That's their job, which everybody forgets about. Pelosi's job isn't to get Trump impeached. Pelosi's job is to hold her caucus together with whatever they decide. Hence the importance of the Tuesday meeting you mentioned and the Wednesday potential vote. Mm-hmm. You can't go to the floor of the votes until you know the votes. And whatever else Pelosi is, she is a superb and excellent vote counter.
Yes.
That's there is.
Right. And you don't have to change that much. The numbers go in order. And you just count until you get to the right number. And that's
you know what that number is, and that's not that hard.
Yeah.
So this Politico article, again, goes on to say that, Schumer's making the case that it's a popular issue. He's got people like Doug Jones in Alabama saying it's a popular issue across America. I've not heard any blowback. Why wouldn't somebody want to hear from witnesses with firsthand information? And because Pelosi, quote, held, unquote, the articles of impeachment, whether she did or whether she didn't, that's what people are talking about. How can you have a trial in the Senate without witnesses? Witnesses has been the discussion. That is actually political help for the Democrats because most people understand that now.
Yes.
And that's why, for example, there was a Quinnipiac, a Sacred Heart poll, different college.
I don't think we've heard of that.
Connecticut,
yes.
Just the Connecticut voters.
New poll.
Asking, they do that periodically, and I usually don't talk about it because it's usually just the Connecticut poll. Oh. And Connecticut isn't necessarily the We Matter state, But they asked about impeachment, and basically something, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but something like more than 60% said, well, the Senate's not going to vote to remove him. But the second question is, well, but do you think he did enough to justify the charges? And the answer was yes.
Yeah.
And I think that reflects pretty much the country. Everybody understands he did something wrong. If there's an argument, it's about what should be the right remedy, election or removal. And then if you ask the other question, well, do you think they'll remove him? Of course, the answer is no, because just like with the DACA shutdown, the Democrats don't have the votes in the Senate. That's just a political fact, but that's not the end point. The end point is public opinion. And so a lot of this is going to affect what happens for Trump's election chances. Everybody knows that, and that's why he's so paranoid about it.
Yeah, well, he's a paranoid guy.
He is, and this just feeds into it.
Good.
Which is another argument that people were having over the weekend, which is like, oh, you people are saying that Trump did this because impeachment. Don't you understand that, Soleimani's a bad guy and this takes plan? In fact, NBC is reporting that this was planned 7 months in advance in terms of how one would do this should one pull the trigger. And, Trump took this opportunity and wasn't talked out of it.
Yeah.
And Democrats aren't saying, oh, well, Trump only did this because of impeachment. What Democrats are saying
happy
is
to say that, though.
It's a bad idea. And among the many factors that filtered into Trump's deranged, demon-driven decision-making process is the idea that impeachment was bothering him and he wanted to do something to either make himself look strong or change the subject or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It's not a simple, oh, I'm going to be impeached, therefore I will take out this bad guy. It's, oh, I'm being impeached, I hate this. I think it's about time we change the subject. Mm-hmm. And that's a completely different calculation there. So people on the right are still having trouble with the concept that there was something wrong with what Trump did. But the country as a whole has no such problem. Again, public opinion. So what does public opinion say? We know this from the latest ABC Ipsos poll. Solid majority of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the Iran crisis, and they say that they feel less safe as a result of his actions. Do you approve or disapprove of how President Trump is handling the crisis with Iran? Approve 43, disapprove 56. Do you think the U.S. airstrikes killed Iranian general has made the U.S. more safe? 25, less safe 52. Hasn't had much effect one way or the other. 22, that's subject to change, of course, depending upon events. So only 25% of the American public believe that Trump's killing of Iran's General Soleimani made them safer. That's Trump's core base, and they'll believe anything he says. But as for the rest of us, not so much. And again, you step back and say, well, what's the purpose of all of this jockeying? It isn't to crush your opponents politically. It's to persuade those who are persuadable out there in the public of what's actually going on. And the public as a whole understands this. Trump is not popular. He's never been popular. Most people think he deserves to be impeached. A slim majority thinks that he should be removed in some polls, and in other polls maybe no. But everybody agrees to the tune of 60 to 70% that he did something wrong, and it's certainly worthy of investigation. And most people want a trial and want witnesses and want to know what actually happened. And this is the tide that the Republicans are fighting. And that's why the Politico article that says that Schumer's final card to play in this mixed metaphor sports analogy, when we've gone from boxing to football to now poker, is that if the American public figures out and decides that Trump's hiding something, it's not going to help him, and it's not going to help the Republicans supporting him. People like Cory Gardner are already toast. And, there's other vulnerable people there. I don't know that Doug Jones gets to keep his seat in Alabama just because of circumstances. But, Tom Tillis's seat is on the table. Of course, the important Georgia seats are on the table. Susan Collins is threatened by this, and so on and so forth. McSally in Arizona. These are all big deals. And the idea that all you have to do is say, no, rally around me. I did it because bad guys, and anybody who complains about this is a terrorist and a traitor, as we talked about last week, that's failing. That's really not the narrative just a few days later. This is not 2003. We're not seeing a 2003 redux.
Well, good. We deserve something better and different. And, I think you made an important point in there. I guess your
If you talk long enough, you get an important point.
Yeah, somewhere in there it happened. I don't remember what it was, but it was great when it did happen.
Somewhere back from 2003 to now, I said something good.
Right. And eventually, right, like you said, like monkeys with typewriters, it does fall out. But I think that, the vast majority of people probably do feel something close to what you mentioned there, that, people who feel like politics is just a bunch of back and forth, he said, she said, both sides, yada, yada, do probably feel somewhere in among all the mess that, well, look, the trial is where you sort it all out. You get both sides get to tell their story. There are witnesses. I just want to know what happened. No more of this nonsense. Let's just find out what the real story is. And some of them will be somewhat disappointed to find out, no, this is going to be political and blocked too. And we're also still not going to tell you what Trump is really doing.
Right. And then the other side will say, well, only guilty people do that.
Right. And, I have a feeling that there are going to be a number of people who are forced to come to that same conclusion. Why wouldn't you just tell your damn story?
Right. Exactly.
So, all right.
So here's Michael Tomasky writing in the Daily Beast how Trump's parade of lies finally caught up with him. Iran blinked, but Trump got no credit for it, and for good reason. He's devalued the authority of his position speaking for America with his endless stream of lies. And then goes on to have a whole story about how that's true.
Nice.
And he tells, I knew this was going to happen. I knew this was going to come up. He had tweeted, read my piece for the great, incredible, historic nugget that I start with.
Oh.
And I saw that and said, oh, you're going to tell the de Gaulle story, right?
Oh.
And, of course, he tells the de Gaulle story.
Oh, all right.
You know the de Gaulle story, don't you?
I think so. Well, I'm looking for the nugget. There's
the big keynote speech was by Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Yes.
That's Mika's late dad. And he shared an anecdote that remains chiseled in my memory, and I'm sure the memories of everyone else there. It was October 1962, and an American official in Paris, the ambassador, who was at the time Chip Bolin, one of the famous post-war wise men, capital letters, was sitting with a French official. I'm pretty certain it was de Gaulle. At any rate, the American informed the Frenchman that intelligence services had in recent days taken some shocking photos of Soviet missiles being placed in Cuba. The American had the table before him, a file folder filled with photos. He went to push it in the direction of the Frenchman, who I'll now call de Gaulle for the sake of simplicity. No, said de Gaulle, according to Brzezinski, I don't need to see those photos. If the President of the United States says it, that's good enough for me. He pushed the folder back, unexamined.
Okay.
Can you imagine, Brzezinski said, a foreign leader reacting that way today? And the answer, of course, was no.
Unless
Not
there were
after
photos of Trump
Bush
in the folder.
and has Saddam Hussein and a whole Iraq weapons of mass destruction. The amount of damage that did to American influence and power around the world continues to be under-discussed and underappreciated, even though at the time we, the bloggers, and few other people were saying, you're lying.
Yeah.
You are lying about this. Oh, well, Freedom Prize, and you guys stink, and, dirty hippies, and what do you know? And everybody was badgered into, supporting the war effort. Again, not happening this time. Good. This is from one of the my favorite never-Trumpers, Tom Nichols. The truth is never enough for Trump, even when he kills a U.S. enemy like Iran Soleimani. Again, this is going to be from a conservative point of view. Every moment must be a heroic thriller, an action movie starring Trump and SEAL Team 6. It's not enough to be a responsible steward of U.S. security. I happen to know because Tom and I talk all the time on Twitter. He's a huge fan of the Die Hard series, so it's not surprising to me that he paints it in terms of a heroic thriller and an action movie.
Well,
Trump sees himself,
film. Yes.
As that character. Because, we have this debate every December. Die Hard is a Christmas movie. So why can't this administration just tell the truth about the U.S. strike on Iranian terror boss Qasem Soleimani? The truth, after all, should be enough. Soleimani helped organize and plan attacks. They killed thousands, Previous administrations didn't kill him only because the risks of further conflict with Iran were too high. The Trump administration, whether wisely or foolishly, took a shot and killed him. There's a clear enough narrative that administration officials should be able to go out and tell the Congress, the American people, and the international community without shooting themselves in the foot over and over. But no, the truth is never enough. It's not enough to be a responsible steward of the nation's security, a role that requires patience and prudence, for which Trump is unprepared and has failed repeatedly. And then they goes on to say this is a Hollywood script about the attacks. And what's most interesting, Mark Esper was asked on the Sunday shows about Trump first said that there was, imminent danger, and then it was an attack on our embassies. Yep. And, as Molly Jong Fast put it, first he said it was 400. Yeah, he was planning to blow up 400 embassies. Did I say 400? I meant 4 million. Yep. Soleimani was going to blow up 4 billion embassies and puppies. Soleimani was going to kill all the puppies. I mean, that's basically how his story evolved. Yep. And on CNN, Mark Esper made it absolutely clear that he had no information or knowledge of any of the intelligence that Trump was citing when he said it was all about the embassies. Now, the idea that the defense secretary, or perhaps in this case the former defense secretary, isn't backing Trump up is pretty amazing.
Yeah, although
for intelligence, he would have seen it. There is no world
that is true.
Where the Department of Defense head wouldn't be aware why he was sending his troops into action.
Charles de Gaulle is the head of the Defense Department. And just
well, in those days, apparently. I don't need the evidence. The president says so, and it's good enough for me. And that's pretty much where we're at.
Essentially, I think that was his way. I think he realized right away, oh my God, what did I just say? And then just basically said, but the president said it, so it's true.
That is true, right.
He thought he
Do you
might save
recall
himself
the 1964 war movie, 7 Days in May?
7 Days in May. No.
Yeah. It's part of the trilogy. Dr. Strangelove, Failsafe, and 7 Days in May, all about the dangers of nuclear war.
Oh, well.
In Failsafe, we accidentally go past the Failsafe point, then accidentally bomb Moscow. And, of course, Dr. Strangelove is famous and is standalone in that regard. Yes. 7 Days in May was about a military coup that was about to take place that the president gets wind of and then has to work real hard with Kirk Douglas to stop Burt Lancaster, but very famous movie, 7 Days in May. So it struck me when I saw the New York Times report, 7 days in January, how Trump pushed U.S. and Iran to the brink of war. The story of that week and the secret planning in the months preceding it ranks as the most perilous chapter so far in President Trump's 3 years in office. Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler was so alarmed he dispatched his brother to Washington for a clandestine meeting with Mr. Trump. I don't know, to do what? To lure him to a embassy so he could dismember him? I don't know what that was about. European leaders, incensed at being kept in the dark, scrambled to keep Iran from escalating. If it did, Americans developed plans to strike a command and control ship and conduct a cyber attack to partly disable Iran's oil and gas sector. I mean, this is serious stuff here. And while this is all going on, the president is saying it's because of imminent danger. And, of course, the NBC News report this morning says actually it was planned 7 months in advance, so there was nothing imminent about it. And the whole story falls apart. So we have a war and peace situation here where the public is understanding, look at the polling, that this was well executed and badly conceived. This was a tactical success, strategic failure kind of thing. And again, the public gets that. They don't need to know the details.
Well, it's easy enough to piece together, I think, at this point. I see there's another piece here that you clipped for the abbreviated pundit roundup that was somewhat interesting too, pointing out that the imminent threat thing doesn't even hold up by itself, absent external information. You could just call the embassy and say, "Look out." As opposed to, well, I'm going to get a drone over there. I'm going to track the guy who planned it a year ago. And right, so it doesn't even offer any imminent protection from an imminent threat.
Right, you didn't do those things.
Yeah. So, right. No bomb threats called in. What's happening here is there's a possibly, mentally ill man making bomb threats to U.S. embassies on television. And the guy's the president. And we're still sort of, not sure what to do about that.
Well, you got to normalize them, and that's really part of the problem. So with the break coming up, I think after the break, maybe we'll switch to domestic politics.
All right. Are there any? Because
sure. Well, Iowa's coming up.
Okay. Right. True. We do go through this pageant. Time to do that. We'll have to find out whether or not Bernie Sanders was helped in Iowa by all of this. That is
and whether or not his feud with Elizabeth Warren is helping or hurting.
Yes. Right. Well, at least that's actually happening. Okay, we'll be right back in 2 minutes to discuss. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue now with politics on the domestic side. According to Greg, although I feel like there might be an international component to this somewhere. We can always tie it together. Chuck Todd does, and so do I. I'm going to grow a goatee and think about it. But we can start domestically. That's right. I mean, I understand that the feud between Bernie and Elizabeth Warren may escalate, like Sunnis and Shias. What does this mean to the wine growing in the Loire Valley? I mean, Well, that's an even better question. Was that ever posed? Was that part of it? Well, I don't know, but it's going to affect the wine stocks, isn't it? I know about the price of tea in China, but I guess so. Because if you're in a wine cave, you want to know these things. Right. True. Right. What else are you going to do? It's very boring in those caves. So here's some headlines for you in terms of what happened over the weekend. Bernie campaign slams Warren as candidate of the elite. That one is from Politico. This one is from Fox News. Warren in rare Sanders rebuke hits fellow 2020 Dem over campaign because his campaign appeared to be saying nasty things. There was a what else did we have? We had an op-ed in one of the Carolina papers by Sanders surrogates. Slamming fellow Democrats. I mean, I'll just step back and say this is the part of the primary, and we see it every 4 years, and we're veterans of this, you and I, where things start to get nasty between the supporters of the individual candidates as things start to get tense, and frankly, not everybody responds great
under pressure.
Yeah. All right.
And I'm not just talking about the campaigns. I'm talking about the surrogates. I'm talking about the followers and supporters and stuff like that. Everything becomes a blood feud.
Right.
Gee, this is an interesting Warren said. What do you got against Bernie that you didn't say that Bernie said something? Wait, calm down. I didn't say anything like that. I'm just saying this is something interesting that somebody else said. And it's not about Biden. And it's not about Bernie. It's not about Pete, formerly known as mayor. And it's not this and it's not that. We're looking at the polls here, of course. Biden remains in the lead nationally. But things are relatively bunched up in Iowa. And with that Des Moines Register Iowa poll showing Bernie with a ever so slight advantage, but still a bunched up 4 at the top with maybe 60% having soft votes, Bernie's being the most solid. It's clear Bernie's in very good position at this particular point relative to where he's been the entire campaign. And at the same time, it's pretty clear that Democrats haven't made up their mind yet. And so, there's nothing to jump off a cliff over or yell at people or get mad because you did this or you didn't do that.
Right. And I'm not against cliffs. I just want to make that clear. And nor am I pro, precipice. I just find this to be true about this situation. You have to preface everything you say.
So if you make a innocuous observational remark, just prepare to be jumped on because clearly you're not being fair.
Yes. Well, the thing to do is to graciously accept that nonsense and then move on with your day. So if you can do it, good luck. I hope it works for you. Someone might call you a commie or a freak or a Russian plant, but don't listen.
Or you do this all the time, or I remember the last time you did it, or I remember you insulted me 9 years ago and I've never forgiven you. Actually, I have, but now that you brought it up, I don't.
Right.
So there's an awful lot of that.
Yes. All right. What can you do?
What can you do?
That's why I don't like it.
Where are we at with these things? Well, at the moment, the Democratic primary forecast from 538 has Biden with the best chance to win, Bernie in second, Warren in third, Mayor Pete, formerly known as Mayor, in fourth. But actually, interestingly, Biden in first, Sanders in second, and if you're looking at the delegate count.
Are you?
Biden in first, Sanders second, no one in third. That's a contested convention. Warren in fourth, Buttigieg in fifth, everybody else. So there'll be a debate. There'll be Democrats on the stage. But at this point in time, as things change, it's looking to be a Biden-Bernie battle. And if that's the case, Biden arguably has been vetted and will continue to be vetted, and Bernie will be vetted and will continue to be vetted. Each of those camps will declare vetting to be unfair. Why are you looking at me? You should be looking at him.
All right.
And, again, just people need to prepare for this.
True. Vetting is not unfair, and you should accept it. But we also understand that the thing you do is say that it's unfair. Then, if we want to stay out of it, we will ignore that you said it was unfair, knowing that it's fair.
But I'm going to end my segment by saying, well, that's all small ball stuff. Let's look at big picture.
Snowball
and
stuff.
I was just fascinated by this Steve Inskeep article. Apparently, he's writing a book about this.
Yes.
About John Fremont. But he's got a piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago that I had highlighted on a Saturday Pundit Roundup. It's 1856 all over again. Oh. Immigration, race, demographic change, political demagogy. That year's presidential race had it all. What can it tell us about 2020?
There will be another article that says nothing, but all right, let's hear what
nothing. Of course, right. So the question of slavery at the present day should not only be the greatest question, but very nearly the sole question, said the Illinois lawyer Abraham Lincoln in an 1856 campaign speech for John Fremont.
Yes.
He was correct. Yet from our distant vantage point, we can see that the disagreement in the 1856 election was relatively narrow. Republicans didn't actually favor abolition, which was considered an extreme position. They just wanted to block slavery from spreading into newly opened territory in the West. And the Democratic Party didn't technically favor slavery's expansion. They just wanted to avoid prohibition and leave the matter to the voters in the new territories. And the policy difference became explosive for a reason that feels very modern. It touched on the country's demographic change. Northern states had grown far more rapidly than the South, which gave them increasing political power. The admission of California as a free state in 1850 gave them even more leverage over the South, and in 1856, Republican leaders saw an opportunity to win the presidency with Northern votes alone.
Ooh.
White Southern leaders perceived a plot to shut them out of power, believed they'd be permanently outnumbered if they were blocked from creating new slave states in the West, and so they threatened to secede from the Union if Republicans won. Pamphlets made the threat explicit. The fearful issue and its destruction would be Fremont's fault if he won, even though white Southerners were making the threat. Right?
Does
that sound familiar with our militias?
Yes, right.
If that guy wins, we're going to have a race riot, and it's your fault.
Right. I'm going to start that race riot, but you made
We're the ones with the guns, and we're the ones starting to shoot, and it's your fault. You made me do this.
Right.
And, anyone who's witnessed the past decade of American politics can't be surprised by how destabilizing the demographic change was in the 1850s. Progressives and Republicans were then the more progressive party, confidently expected that population change would help them win without having to compromise with conservatives. Conservatives, who were then pro-slavery Democrats, vowed to wreck the system if they couldn't reinforce it against the change they dreaded. Mm-hmm. Fear prevailed. A Democrat won the election, James Buchanan, a Northerner strongly tied to Southern interests. Buchanan then manipulated the courts to entrench his pro-slavery views, lobbying to make the Dred Scott decision in 1857, which proclaimed that black people were not citizens, and the phrase all men created equal didn't mean what it said.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, the true meaning of the story is the
militias.
Aftermath.
Yes, there was an aftermath.
Republicans did win in 1860, and this time the demographic gamble succeeded, and then we had secession, of course, and then we had the Civil War.
Yeah.
Which was not the war between the states, it was the Civil War.
Yes, because we needed civility.
Well, what are the lessons for 2020 from that? Expect a terrifying year.
Yeah, or a war between the states.
What drives Americans to extremes is not losing an election, but fear of losing for all time. Think of the white evangelicals. As Democrats and progressives count on an ever more diverse population to ensure victory, some of President Trump's supporters foresee permanent defeat. Fox News stokes dread of demographic change with repeated images of migrants climbing fences. The president told supporters as a candidate that he was their last chance to save the country. Right? Some of Mr. Trump's critics fear permanent defeat for their side as he appoints judges who could remake the courts for a generation and dismiss limits on his power by asserting the right to do whatever I want as president. When politicians exploit such fears, voters can find an antidote by recalling the aftermath of 1856. Whatever the result in 2020, it's a safe bet that close to half of us will consider it a disaster. Another election will follow. We hope.
Yes, right. Cross fingers.
Hope. Cross fingers. But, the idea that people are scared and angry and feel like their side is losing, I mean, that's the Republican perennial victim, sort of thing that we see. And so that justifies cheating. And that's why you do voter suppression, because you got to. I mean, otherwise you're going to lose the election. You can't have that. So, you have to do whatever.
Right. No, I think there really is something to that. It's kind of funny. Right at the end where you were saying, we're hearkening back and people have to think about what this means and what could it mean for 2020 and people realizing.
Yeah, well, Fort Sumter is what it could mean.
Yeah. The problem
that's what struck me, not that, there'll be another election.
Yes, well, right. That's true. There was another election even in the Civil War, of course. Mm-hmm. But, it was not fun, I'm sure. And, I worry that I mean, he made the point as well as you could make it. I do wonder about whether if you walked around and told people, well, we had the same thing in 1856. So, and people will say, yeah. And then after 1856, yeah. What happened after that? 1857? No, I mean, like the next election would have been, a lot of people will be stumped. What was the next year for the election? 1860. All right, yeah. Civil War. Oh, yes, right. Oh, yeah, right. Bad, yeah. What did you say though?
Like a big deal.
1856 was happening. Fremont. Who's that? Yeah. Well, you have to read the article. What can I tell you?
Part of the deal is John Fremont was a celebrity at the time.
Oh.
See, he had gone and he
had
an apprentice? Mapped the one of the other interesting things that he said, I don't know if it was in this article or somewhere else that I read, He's talking about, part of the deal here is that there was all this new technology that everybody had high hopes for. We had the telegraph. And what that meant is that if a news event happened, all of a sudden, all of the papers in the country would report it at the same time.
It's the internets.
This is amazing. And so all of this happened, and everybody said, well, this is going to be great. It's going to tie the country together. And instead what happened, I think he wrote, is that people were horrified to find out what their fellow citizens actually thought.
Yeah, well.
That is also very evocative of now in the internet and Twitter and Facebook.
You're going to find out what your fellow citizens think because they're going to tell you on Twitter.
Exactly, and you're going to know, and you're going to say, oh, my God, I can't believe you think that.
Yeah, that's true. Or you're going to put it up on your Facebook wall. Everybody, I want to share pictures of my grandson, but first, kick all the immigrants out of the country. Oh, no.
Right. Okay, he has it. Yeah, here. In theory, new technology could have brought the country together. The recent invention of the telegraph miraculously sped communications, making it possible for newspapers across the country to print the same news simultaneously. In reality, voters were horrified by what they learned about one another. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's what happens, and you delve into stories about white evangelicals and why they vote the way they do. And, for example, in the Pundit Roundup today, I have a piece somewhere.
Oh, look.
By John Fay, USA Today. Evangelicals for Trump was an awful display by supposed citizens of the kingdom of God. He himself is an evangelical, by the way. Trump mocked his enemies, trafficked in half-truths, installed fear, and expressed zero humility. My fellow evangelicals loved every minute of it.
Yes.
And he's just sort of decrying the way things have gone for his evangelical community.
Yes, it's bad.
Well,
it's a bad community now. I'll tell you that. It's a rough neighborhood, like where planes get shut down. Yeah.
Right.
Tehran.
I've spent my entire adult life in the evangelical community. I had a born-again experience when I was 16, never looked back. I teach history at a Christian college with evangelical roots. As a historian, I study American evangelicalism. But I've never seen anything like what I witnessed as I watched Trump speak to a few thousand of his evangelical supporters at King Jesus International Ministry, a largely Hispanic megachurch in Miami, during the kickoff to his Evangelicals for Trump campaign. It's no coincidence this rally took place 2 weeks after Christianity Today, the historic voice of moderate evangelicalism, called for Trump's removal from office. The magazine's editor, Mark Galley, described the president's character as, quote, grossly immoral, and, quote, and warned his fellow evangelicals their ardent support was damaging to their Christian witness. And then goes on to describe the rally and some of the bizarre and hateful things that happened there. But yeah, that's exactly what Inskeep is talking about in 1856.
Yes, it's a good article. It really is, and deserves more attention. Maybe I'll even give it more attention, because you can parse each part of it about for modern parallels, but also just to see how long a lot of these same issues have been around. Not slavery, but the idea, for instance, of the contest between northern and southern states coming down to the rules under which new states and territories would be admitted, which was a proxy war for control of probably of the Senate, really, and the House as well, but more directly for the Senate because of, if you have enough free states, you can overwhelm and eliminate slavery. If you have enough slave states, you can expand things and get more votes for what you want to do. The packing of the courts, it's an awful lot to it.
Sure. And, these large grappling over who's running the place, of course, go back years and years and years. I remember when I was in college in the 70s, Carl Oglesby was talking about the uber struggle between the Yankees and the Cowboys. That is to say, Boston banking versus Texas oil. And it was, since the moneyed interests were running the country, which money are you talking about here? Because they had totally different interests, totally different foreign policy desires, connections, and so on and so forth. And you connect it to Europe, you're looking toward Asia, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So, that kind of big struggle always happens. And it's good to see it come down to actually a description that makes sense and resonates, and especially if you're looking historically. But again, those are the big picture things that I think we should all consider in the back of our minds when we look at the primary and decide who we want to go to. And rather than turning on our fellow Democrats, which is inevitable, I mean, it always happens, and then you kiss and make up, and then you go hopefully united into the next election. I think there's a bunch of Democratic Congress critters who put out a statement saying, we are supporting different candidates, but we are all united in agreeing to support whoever wins, which was missing in 2016 and really nice to see now.
Okay. I'm glad to see it.
And that's how we should look at this. So, somebody's up, somebody's down. We'll see what happens. I'm not disrespecting your candidate when I say that, because obviously your candidate's better than the others.
Right.
But nonetheless, we got to cover them all. So there we are. Take care.
This is the best.
And this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning. And, there's social science behind our interactions and why we interrupt each other all the time.
That's
we
true,
talked about that last week.
Right.
It's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I'll be back and we'll do it again on Wednesday.
Okay. Well, very
Assuming
good.
you're here. I mean, you never know.
Right. To hell with it. I'm taking Wednesday off forever.
There you go.
Maybe. Okay.
Take care, and I'll talk to you then, one way or the other.
Okay, we can do that. I appreciate it. Thanks very much. Good start today. All right. Well, it reminded me also, I never heard it put in quite those terms, Yankees, cowboys, but I have heard it in terms of like, well, here's what you do to deal with it. The Democratic Party for a long time held that coalition together, with a different expression of the same relationship, I think. I don't remember who it was that I saw expressing it this way, but it may have been like Robert Caro or something, or what. But it was definitely in a book I had read about sort of the LBJ, I guess maybe the 40s through 60s Democratic House caucus, described as the speakership moving along the Boston-Austin axis, that there was a constant trade between, if not necessarily Boston metropolitan area or Massachusetts proper, then certainly the solid northeastern core, then and flip-flopping between there and Texas, those being the gravitational centers of the Democratic Party at the time. So interesting, and I imagine it's just the other side of the same coin there. That's where the tensions were, and the only way to get past the tensions in a cohesive manner, if you can call the Democratic Party of that era cohesive, and you can, it's just chaotic, but and perhaps internally inconsistent. And the only way you get past that is to say, well, the leaders we're gonna have to switch off leadership between the two axes here, or the two poles, and everybody kind of gets their turn at leadership. And sometimes you're in and sometimes you're out, but you can look forward to things, the poles reversing sometime soon, and eventually everybody moves out of the top spot, and the next person in line is likely to be, whether it's intentionally done out of a sense of fairness, or the outside spends more energy enthusiastically organizing in order to grab back the top spot next time around. I'm not exactly sure, chicken and egg, but I guess it's to be expected. I guess maybe what we'll do with that, pardon me, moving on to more stories of internal caucus politics. I have much to say about this story, which, again, depending on where you sit, where you stand, whatever your posture is, will color how you see the story. Lots of people had lots to say about it. Huffington Post, now HuffPost, reporting yesterday, Daniel Marins writing the story, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's new PAC is already raising big money. The New York Congresswoman is funding candidates herself instead of routing it through the Democratic Party's campaign arm. The week ended last week with some discussion among those who focus on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as allies or enemies about her failure to remit the required dues to the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. All sitting members of Congress, as members of the Democratic Party, are obligated, some more so than others, depending on leadership positions, etc. They're obligated. They essentially have a tithe that they're supposed to make to the DCCC. And to no one's surprise, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has expressed her strident differences with the way the DCCC does business on a number of different fronts, has not delivered that money. Now, there's several ways to look at that. One, of course, is, well, she disagrees with how they use the money, so why would she deliver up that money? The other is to say, well, you are now a sitting Democratic member of the House, and what powers you might have as a member of the majority party in the House are afforded to you because of that majority. And many sorts of Democrats help make up that majority. And you, you owe it to yourself or to your constituents or to the rest of us, or however you want to express it, to join in the effort to keep that majority, so that as you accrue tenure over the years as a member of the House, it can grow and develop into possibly a chair, a committee chair or a leadership position or what have you. Whether or not she has designs on it, it's a possibility, and I guess she might have designs on it, but perhaps from a slightly different angle, because what she's done here is started a leadership PAC, and I don't know if she wanted to describe it that way necessarily, but it is what it is, and I think it's important to kind of talk about that. The other immediate reaction to it from her opponents, not Republican opponents, but internal Democratic opponents or skeptics or what have you, however you want to express it, was, well, I thought you said that PACs and all PACs were evil, and now here you are starting a PAC. And to some extent that's true. I mean, it's defensible in a slightly different way. I don't know I'm not that close of a follower of AOC. It's entirely possible, given the kind of person she is and the kind of people she has as supporters, that she may have said at some point, and meant it, may have said at several points, that PACs are evil. Whether it came from a place of understanding what sorts of PACs were out there or not, I have no doubt that she's received something of an education here in Washington, D.C. Anyway, what I want to say about it, and I guess we'll probably have to continue this on the other side of the break, is that I think that she knows very well what this is. I'm sure she does regard it as a leadership PAC. She may approach things slightly differently. But one of the other, actually, even before we move to that, I should point out there are many members, several, who with regularity over the course of the years, over the course of decades, have failed to remit their dues to the DCCC for a number of different reasons. Sometimes they're pleading poverty. Sometimes they're pleading that they're engaged in a close re-election battle and can't afford to part with the cash, since it would, and perhaps because it would likely be coming back to them anyway in order to defend their seat. Sometimes it's forgiven or looked past, and sometimes it's not. But there's very rarely a fuss put up, even when it's reported in a way that's meant to generate a fuss. But there's very rarely a fuss when conservative blue dog Democrats fail to remit to the DCCC. Oh, they're defending their seats. They're on the bubble. They're on the front lines. Yeah, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Colin Peterson, literally went decades without paying his DCCC dues, and it wasn't because he was engaged in such close re-election fights. It was because he disagreed ideologically with the Democratic leadership and didn't feel like turning over the money he was raising to a leadership he didn't believe in or trust, and allow them to elect people or help elect other members of the Democratic caucus who didn't agree with him ideologically and would endanger him ideologically, which is the exact mirror of what Alexandria OcasioCortez is doing. And this is blasphemy somehow. But for when Colin Peterson did it, it was terrific. Everyone loved it. It was just, or at least there weren't very many complaints about it. What she's doing here, though, also it should be pointed out, is one way of viewing it is that she's doing what everybody has said she ought to do. Certainly, she's doing what I certainly said she ought to do. This is how you build power in Washington. And some people will view that as hypocritical in itself. I view it as a learning experience having come to fruition. But a lot of people said, well, you know, there were lots of complaints. You got to grow up in Washington. You got to learn how the way the game is played. You got to learn to understand reality here and how you get ahead and how you make policy advances and how you find allies and build coalitions. And so she said, you know, you're right. I'm going to do that. I'm going to play that game. I'm going to help people get elected. I'm not going to do it through the DCCC. But if the complaint is I don't help my fellow Democrats, I can obviate that by helping my fellow Democrats. Oh, but you're helping the wrong fellow Democrats. Well, now we're really getting somewhere. That might be an interesting debate to have all by itself, but the idea that she's unwilling to help fellow Democrats isn't true. It's just a different set of them than you were thinking of. But, you know, she was told you're going to have to wake up to the reality of the way Washington works and the way Washington power works and the way you build power in Washington. And so she did. And then it's like, well, we won't take yes for an answer. We're gonna bash you for doing that thing that we said you should do because you're gonna do it in a way different from the way we would do it. We meant you should raise money and hand it over to us to elect Democrats of the sort that we like. And here you are raising money and handing it to Democrats of the sort you like. And, you know, that's not really so legitimate of a complaint, quite honestly. Perhaps we'll continue on this after the break. I think I have more to say on it. We'll see if we can make it interesting. That'll be the challenge. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Maybe what we ought to do is dive into Daniel Marin's retelling of the story in HuffPost and parse it along the way. We'll start with this. So New York Democratic Representative Alexandria OcasioCortez's new political action committee raised over $69,000 on Saturday, prompting a number of nice comments, of course. And that was on Saturday, its first day of public fundraising, showcasing her influence amid a feud with senior House Democrats. Ocasio-Cortez's campaign, which shared in the proceeds from email and Twitter fundraising appeals for the PAC, and that too apparently a point of controversy among some, but I think a non-issue, really. What they were, I found people complaining, well, she's keeping half the money, was the way that they were expressing their complaint. And, you know, she's not keeping half the money. She's not putting it in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's pocket and buying margaritas with it, although you can do that with what she was doing. Well, you can't do that with part of the money that she was said to be keeping, but you can do it with the leadership PAC, interestingly enough. And to some extent, a limited extent, you can pay for margaritas for other people to come and drink so that they give you cash money and checks at your fundraisers. But anyway, yeah, I thought to the extent that anybody was saying she's keeping the money, I thought was a disingenuous way of putting it. It might actually be confusing because what she's doing is she's raising the money through Act Blue, and Act Blue does not have the most fantastic, most clear platform for handling this sort of thing. It's a great platform for any people, whether you're raising money for a leadership PAC because you're a member of Congress or you're just a regular citizen who wants to, I think the best term I have seen used for it so far, funnel money contributions to your preferred candidates without handling the money yourself, without handling the checks as a bundler might, or without establishing a PAC and going through all the headache of administering it and filing all the paperwork, you put up a list of candidates and you say, donate to my fund here, or through, use my auspices, under my auspices, donate to Act Blue, and the money you donate will be, if by default, if you put up a list like this, the default is all the money that you donate gets split evenly among everybody on your list. And you have the opportunity, at least Act Blue affords you the opportunity, to allocate your funds differently if you want to manually do so. So if you're donating $100 and there are 5 candidates on the list, each one gets $20 if you don't do anything. Or you can click and say, I want all 100 to go to candidate A and 0 to candidates B through E, or any combination. So, it's doable. At least the opportunity is there. That's fair. But I guess also what isn't entirely clear is, for instance, on Alexandria OcasioCortez's new Act Blue page, which is what she really launched, although I guess she also established the paperwork for her leadership pack, what's she calling it? Courage to Change. Why not? That's better than trying to come up with an acronym that spells, Ocasio or something like that, or whatever. Anyway, but what she's got arranged there is she said, all right, well, if you land on my page, I've got 2 destinations for your campaign donations. One is the new PAC, Courage to Change, and the other is my re-election campaign, which on the Act Blue platform, on their format, reads Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It says, if you donate the money, half will go to Courage for Change and the other half will go to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, D, New York, whatever her district number is. And it's an awkward phrasing, because what they mean is it will go to this candidate in their regular election campaign fund. But it doesn't say that. It says it'll go to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But that's not what it means, and I think that's a poor phrasing, and they ought to rework it somehow. But then there's also the criticism of, well, if you want to raise money for your PAC, raise money for your PAC, and you can have your candidate, your campaign, your re-election fund on another page, and you can. But clearly people who are going to land on this page are fans of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I doubt very much whether, but there's plenty of people in the world. I could see myself saying, I will donate to your PAC because I'm a big believer in, or I don't know, I'm a big believer in the power of leadership PACs. I don't know if I think they're great ideas, but they work pretty well, and I would like to see a different set of people availing themselves of them. But I can't prevent people who I don't like from availing themselves of them. That's not fair. But if you're going to land on this list because you're thinking of giving money to Courage to Change, it's likely that you don't mind at all if some of that money, whether it's half because you allow it to default or you apportion it differently because you do so manually and consciously, you won't mind supporting Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's own re-election campaign fund. So that doesn't bother me, and it's a format that almost everybody adopts. And I don't view it as grift in any way. If you're giving money, it says what's going to happen to it, and it's right there on the screen. And if you don't like that, it doesn't have to happen to you. And if you click on a thing and you can't understand what they mean by half the money going to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez D, New York, as opposed to it all just goes to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez personally, if you can't understand that and you have questions, ask them. You'll find out what the answer is. If you go ahead and click through, you'll find out, oh yeah, this is the candidate fund. Anyway, on its own, HuffPost reports, the PAC, Courage to Change, received over 4,600 donations as of late Saturday night in amounts that averaged under $15. It's a very exciting launch, she says Ocasio-Cortez campaign spokesman Corbin Trent. What a name. Anyway, When I see so many people stand up and say they are ready to change not just D.C., but the country, it fills me with hope. Boilerplate. Ocasio-Cortez launched Courage to Change to support both progressive incumbent Democrats and primary challengers whose positions are close to her own. That's what you do with them. She has thus far endorsed progressives taking on conservative Democratic representatives Henry Cuellar of Texas and Dan Lipinski of Illinois. In 2 fundraising emails and a tweet, Ocasio-Cortez and her campaign framed the PAC explicitly as an alternative to the DCCC, which is House Democrats' the official campaign fundraising arm. And that's an interesting position all by itself. And it's a difference between hers and other leadership PACs. Other leadership PACs rarely advertise themselves as an alternative to the DCCC, though they are alternatives to the DCCC. They are the candidate whose leadership, or the member whose leadership PAC it is, makes decisions directly themselves, I guess along with their treasurer, who is going to get the money. You don't have to declare up front a list like you do if you're doing things through Act Blue, but you can if you want to. But you get a lot more flexibility. And, if you're angry with the DCCC, you're going to want an alternative to the DCCC. It's not going to be one because it's not going to have nearly the reach of the DCCC. That's, the ability that they have comes from pooling so much money from so many members and using it that way. And because it comes from so many members of so many different types and persuasions, it spreads its money out quite broadly too. Big tent style. And if you don't like that, I guess you can start your own. But, I think it would be, it would probably be more honest to say, well, we're going to run it like a leadership PAC. But that could be a bit of a turn off to some of her donors or potential donors. And instead say, this is, I'm targeting the DCCC. I'm going to run a parallel operation and do it my way. And that might be exciting to them, but that's fundraising. You give the pitch that works, so long as it's arguably true, unless you're a Republican, in which case you just give the pitch that works, whether it's true or not. Anyway, she says, we're paving a different path, her campaign wrote in the first fundraising email. The DCCC has been an entrenched tool in a system that blocks working class candidates from running for office and protects out-of-touch incumbents. That is an unfortunate side effect of working with the entire caucus. It's true. But, of course, this is what makes this thing so exciting to me, is that, of course, a leadership PAC is an entrenched tool in a system that blocks all sorts of candidates from running for office insofar as they choose not to support them, and does, in fact, sometimes protect incumbents who are out of touch with somebody somewhere, hopefully not their own districts. Anyway, although she is a fundraising powerhouse, Ocasio-Cortez has refused to pay $250,000 in dues. It's not a small amount, the dues. $250,000 in dues that the DCCC asks of members of the House Democratic Caucus over a 2-year period. In the 2020 election, the DCCC plans to use those funds to protect the Democratic majority in the House and pick up Republican-held seats. They just perhaps disagree on who the best candidates are to do that, as between themselves and AOC or anybody else, for that matter. Everybody has disagreements with the DCCC somewhere. And on Friday, several of her Democratic colleagues, including Representative Gregory Meeks of New York, ripped her abstention from the process in a story on Fox News' website. Not the place to go with that. Meeks succeeded former Representative Joe Crowley, whom Ocasio-Cortez ousted, as head of the Queens County Democratic Party, and supported a candidate running against the one Ocasio-Cortez backed for Queens District Attorney. So they've been at loggerheads before, these two. Ocasio-Cortez defended the decision, as she has done in the past, on the grounds that she has raised $300,000 for incumbent members directly, half of them in swing seats, and that she takes issue with the DCCC's policy of blacklisting consultants and other groups that work with primary challengers. For Ocasio-Cortez, who got to the House through a successful primary run against an incumbent, the fight has a personal quality. I don't see the sense in giving $250,000 to an organization that has clearly told people like me that we're not welcome, she told Fox News. And that's a bit of hyperbole too. Of course, welcome is a relative term. She is absolutely welcome to give $250,000 like everybody else. And that's it, as opposed to, well, I think we should back this candidate or that candidate. Well, we actually disagree. Well, then that means I'm not welcome. Well, no, it means you and I disagree. Well, what about the blacklisting of consultants? Okay, well, that's a little closer to the mark, but it doesn't mean that you're not welcome. It might mean that consultants you favor are not welcome, or a consultant that you might want to become if you one day leave the house might not be welcome. But I don't know. The broad blanket statement of, well, we're not welcome is also not really true. But okay. Ocasio-Cortez is taking steps to mount an independent political operation capable of rivaling the establishment party organs with which she has jousted. Here, I think he means leadership PACs. It won't be capable of rivaling the DCCC. It just won't. Never. It's not going to have that kind of money. And it's not going to have that kind of reach. And it's not designed to have that kind of reach either. I mean, if she had that amount of money, it wouldn't probably find that many candidates to back, because she would limit herself ideologically, which would be perfectly within reason. Anyway, the mere creation of a PAC to support other candidates, an entity commonly known as a leadership PAC, is typically the type of endeavor limited to members of party leadership or other seasoned members of Congress. No, that is not true. In the first place, it is the case that rarely, but not never, rarely do you see first-term members establishing leadership PACs. But it's not like, 1 in a million. It's just rare. Anybody who has designs on having a long-term impact in the House eventually starts one. Even people who never come close to leadership, even freshmen who have no business in the old way of thinking about leadership at this stage, or that it's somehow unseemly to declare an interest in one day being in leadership. They don't typically do it, but they have done it. I've seen members do it. It's always a surprise when they do, but it's forward thinking when they do. Sometimes it's people that I wish weren't forward thinking who do it. But it has been done. But the bigger mistake, I think, in this is a matter of phrasing. I don't know whether he meant anything by this or was just describing things backwards, because a lot of people describe these things backwards. Just as, I don't know, well, there's a couple of analogies. I was going to use an analogy to like the filibuster thing, or like when people say it takes a 2/3 vote to change the rules of the Senate, when what you really mean is, well, it takes a 2/3 vote to invoke cloture so that you can get to the vote on a proposal to change the rules of the Senate. But that proposal, once cloture has been invoked, can pass with a bare majority. So no, it doesn't require a 2/3 vote to change the rules. It requires a 2/3 vote to get to the cloture so that you can try to change the rules later. Or another analogy that comes to mind, and the problem is that it came to mind quickly and then it passed quickly too. But we'll see if it pops back in anytime soon. But yes, right, in the filibuster arena. For instance, the idea that, or saying we're going to change the filibuster rules. Well, you're not. There aren't any filibuster rules. There are only cloture rules. The filibuster isn't in the rules. What is in the rules is this is how many votes it will take to cut off debate over someone's objection. And in that sense, it sort of negatively creates the filibuster. You can keep debate open forever because these are the rules about how to close debate, and it's hard to close debate. See what I mean? There's no rule about, yes, you're allowed to, block a vote indefinitely. It doesn't say that. It just says vote comes after debate closes, and this is how you close debate. You can either do it by unanimous consent or hold a vote on it. And this is how many votes you need in order to prevail in that vote. Anyway, it's sort of backwards in this sense. A leadership PAC is typically the type of endeavor that members of party leadership maintain, undertake. But they have the chicken and egg situation wrong. Leadership PACs aren't PACs that you start once you're a leader so that you can help other people. I mean, that's a nice way of thinking of it, but it never works that way. Leadership PACs are things you use to become elected to leadership. We've described them on the show before, but if you happen to be a new listener, or, like 6 months or a year, I don't know how long it's been since I've described what leadership PACs are. What do? You're not a leader. You want to be a leader? How do you get to be a leader? The Democratic caucus gets together and votes on these things. Who should be the majority leader, or sometimes the minority leader, or the majority whip, or who should head the DCCC and make those or help steer those decisions over who gets all that money and how much and for what reasons. These are elected positions in the Democratic caucus, and you campaign for them like anything else. But along the way, I have discovered that although it is not necessarily the case that all members of the Democratic caucus, or maybe possibly, for all I know, even most members of the Democratic caucus, it's not the case that they cast their votes necessarily. We don't know why they cast. No one ever has to explain anything. Some people cast their votes because I agree with that person ideologically, and I want them to be in leadership. Others cast those votes because they say, when I needed help in my close race, that person helped me with a campaign contribution from their leadership PAC. And what I have discovered along the way is, whatever the reasoning is, if you have a contested leadership election going on, majority leader, minority leader, majority whip, leader, whip, DCCC chairman, caucus chairman, chairmanships of individual committees in the House when your party is in leadership or is in the majority, or as ranking member when you're in the minority. All of these things get voted on one way or another, not always all at once, but the party leadership certainly does. If you've got a contested race, I have found that the best indicator, if you find out at the last minute that there is a vote coming up on Tuesday for this position, and you want to predict, for some reason, who's going to win, the most effective method I have for doing it quickly is to look at the leadership PACs, if any, maintained by the two contestants. And if one of them doesn't have one, that's a shock. And they're going to lose, probably. That's what the prediction system says. The prediction system is this: total up how much money they have given out over, really, I would say, all the years that they've operated their leadership PAC. And whoever has given out the most money, particularly if there's a clear difference, but whoever's given out the most money tends to win the leadership race. Sometimes, I suppose, if $1 or $2 separates two contestants, that might be a bad predictor. But I've not been wrong with this, by the way. It just happens to be true. I'm sure there's an instance somewhere of it not being true, so you don't want to say 100% of the time, but every time I've ever checked, it's been true. Although occasionally the initial numbers don't give you the right answer. I've looked after the fact, looked back at the results of a race and said, all right, well, this person who lost gave out more money. And then I usually find, oh, well, in the last election cycle, they gave out more money. But overall, this person's been giving money out to fellow members of the Democratic caucus since 1988. And this person's been giving out money since 2012. So when you add it all up, the person who has dispersed the most over all the years appears to it. And so you say, well, maybe that's unfair because they've been in the House much longer. They've had a longer time to do it. Well, that's tenure in office. That also plays into leadership decisions and election decisions, sometimes directly, Or I've had a political base for longer, and I've talked to a lot more people, and I've had more opportunity to give out more money. And so what? What's wrong with that? The other person could have run for office earlier too, or started a leadership pack earlier, but they didn't. Fact is, I've helped more people, and those people are in this room voting. And if I've helped 100 people get elected, and they've helped 10 people get elected, I will likely get 100 votes, and they'll get 10, and I'll win. Because the decision isn't usually made on ideological grounds or anything like that. The best example of it is the 2006 fight for the Democratic leader position between Steny Hoyer, who is still the Democratic leader, and Jack Murtha, the Marine turned congressman from a blue-collar Pennsylvania district who famously turned against the Iraq War and was the first, revered veteran member of the House to reverse himself on the war and to speak out against it as a huge mistake. And as the caucus had just come to realize that his position was the correct one, it was thought that maybe he would make a better Democratic leader than Steny Hoyer. Actually, it was sort of felt outside of the caucus by the Democratic base that was the case. Because most of the Democratic base doesn't know much about the differences between Jack Murtha and Steny Hoyer. Neither one of them are particularly familiar to us in 2006 necessarily. I knew who they were, having worked in the House, but not everybody did. Steny Hoyer perhaps maybe a little bit more familiar because he was working so hard towards leadership. Anyway, so here's the opportunity to sort this out along ideological lines. The House Democratic Caucus is overwhelmingly turning against the Iraq War here. And everybody thinks what Murtha done is brave. It's made him a national celebrity of sorts. No brainer. Who should be leading us into the next election cycle, right? Well, it was a no-brainer for the members of the House Democratic Caucus. They looked at when was John Murtha ever helped me? John Murtha has been a great help to himself. John Murtha has been a great help to the country. True, yes, by, in this one instance. Anyway, turning against the Iraq War and, been a great help in building up the infrastructure in Pennsylvania and elsewhere as an appropriations committee member and done lots of great things. And so does Steny Hoyer, but less flashy. But what was true was Steny Hoyer had been on the rubber chicken circuit for decades, raising money for people, campaigning for people, handing out checks to people. And Murtha basically had just said, oh my God, I had never really entertained the idea of moving into leadership. But now some people say it's a possibility based on what's happened on the Iraq War. I should get a leadership pack together. And he started to do it, and he used his celebrity to raise money, and he handed it out as fast as he could, but he couldn't catch up to Hoyer's decades of grunt work. And Hoyer won. And Hoyer won with a lot of the votes of the most anti-Iraq War members of the Democratic caucus, too. And it was because they were there by virtue of having had help along the way from Steny Hoyer. And that's how those things get decided. And so if you're looking for a quick and dirty indicator, that's what you look for. How much money have they given out? And if you want to be really super precise, or if it's close and you want to make a prediction ahead of time, then like filling out your NCAA brackets, you don't necessarily just go with who has the best winning record or the strongest ranking in the sports writers polls or what have you. You break it down and look more closely at things. Who has given the most money to members of the Democratic caucus who are still going to be here on hand to vote? Because sometimes you give away lots of money, but you give to people who lose. And that doesn't help you get votes in the Democratic caucus because those people never show up to vote because they're not members of the caucus. Or you give money a long time ago to somebody who was a member of the caucus and has since moved on to the Senate or lost or, turned lobbyist, whatever the hell they might have done, and they're just, for whatever reason, not there to vote for you. That's a much more tedious process, of course, and not nearly as quick, but probably more accurate. Point is, this is how you build power And this is how you fill the ranks of the Democratic caucus with people who are either indebted to you in some way, or ideologically similar to you, or both. If you give out your leadership PAC money to candidates who are ideologically similar and they win, you are boosting the number of people among the ranks of the Democratic caucus who can vote for you for these positions. Otherwise known as building a coalition and a power base and moving forward from there, which is, after all, what everybody said a serious member of Congress ought to be doing all the time. And so she is. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. I think we've probably done the topic to death. There's just a paragraph or two more to the actual article, and we might as well read that aloud for good reminders, factual reminders. The PAC expands AOC's reach in more tangible ways as well. A PAC allows her to contribute a larger figure to candidates than she otherwise would be able to give. Candidates, that is, as a candidate for office, if she wanted to give money out of her campaign fund to someone else's campaign fund, you are limited to $2,000 a year from your own campaign to another campaign per election cycle. But a PAC can contribute up to $5,000 per election cycle. And since the primary and general elections are considered separate cycles, that means you can transfer $10,000 total to a candidate from the start of a primary to the close of a general election. The legal structure of a PAC also allows her political operation to coordinate directly with a campaign for whatever purposes it wishes. And that's another sort of point of confusion about PACs, as, let's see, another tweeter points out in picking up on Politico's reporting on the story. It looks like Politico. The headline appears to be here: AOC, sworn enemy of dark money, now pushing her own PAC. And Matt Corley correctly points out here that there is plenty of legitimate criticism of leadership PACs. I mean, there is some, and I guess you could call it plenty. But they are not dark money. Leadership PACs report both their contributions and expenditures to the FEC. Dark money groups spend money to influence elections but deny they are political committees in order to keep donors secret. They are also not super PACs that are otherwise forbidden from coordination with the candidates. A regular PAC, as we said here, is not only it's limited in the amount of money it can give, and sort of in exchange, it's also allowed to coordinate, which is kind of what you would expect she would want to do. It's not that she wants all of her influence to be money. She wants to coordinate with people on campaign strategy so that she can have a better shot at being ideologically in tune with those she supports. It makes sense. I don't know whether it will ultimately be successful as a leadership PAC. I don't know that she intends to seek a leadership office with it. But that also doesn't really matter. I mean, it could be just as useful to say, well, if I built a larger ideological team here inside the caucus, somebody else could be the one running for for leadership office, and we would throw our support perhaps behind that person, or I might call on you to throw your support to that person. And if you valued my opinion and my money, you would follow along. And we would get what we wanted out of the elections, even if it's not me in a leadership position. So, really my objection to the objections was that this is a step towards playing on the same level playing field as everybody else and putting your ideological preferences out there in the open, making an open bid for changing the way things are done in Washington. Ironically, by doing things the same way things have always been done in Washington, but with a different aim, a different message, what have you. Can that change over time? Will she be co-opted by this and become a member of the establishment and eventually a middle-of-the-road or conservative Democrat? No, I doubt it, but that's also a subjective assessment. Basically, what happens with leadership PACs over time is you decide, I'm not perfectly content with the way things are going, or you could be perfectly content with the way things are going, but you want to be the one who's the most famous and leading and can make decisions about which way policy will break. So for that reason alone, you want to be in leadership. Whatever the motivation is. But the cycle is I am dissatisfied in some way with who's in leadership for some reason. I want to change who's there, or I want to change what leadership does in the House, whether for whatever the issue is. But the point is that there are basically three things that you can do if you are disappointed in some fashion with the leadership. One is give up and quit. And that is free. Anybody can do it, and you don't have to raise any money. It's also, I guess, it's ideologically pure, but it doesn't help anybody. Obviously, you ran for Congress for a reason. The other options are, two subsets of the same basic opposite, which is I'm going to do something about it. I can either change the minds of the people currently in leadership, which is, tall order, but it's doable. That's what you're supposed to. Part of your job is persuasion, right? And the other option is change the makeup of leadership. And that one makes more sense to people who have just changed the makeup of the leadership of their congressional district by winning office. They know how to do that. But those two paths both cost a certain amount of money, and there are various ways to change the minds of leadership. And sometimes one of the ways is giving out lots and lots of money. It can be done. That can be done one of two ways too. Give out lots and lots of money to the people preferred by the leadership now, and then they come to view you as an ally and lend you a more sympathetic ear when you want to talk to them about policy or moving into leadership yourself, or both. The other way to do it is displace them. Right? You basically support your own ideological movement so that you can populate the Democratic caucus with people who will vote for a different leadership, one that agrees with you. I mean, it's a totally legitimate thing to do, and everybody does it. And it doesn't mean you're a sellout. It doesn't mean you're a hypocrite necessarily. I mean, if you really want to hang that on her, people did, apparently. You can say, all right, well, it's certainly hypocritical to run out and saying all PACs are evil and anybody who accepts PAC money is therefore, by extension, evil, and then start your own PAC. True, that is hypocritical. Now, what are you going to do about that hypocrisy? Either as the person who's the actor in the political arena or the observer. And, you could be ideologically pure or demand ideological purity of others and force that person not to start a leadership PAC, not to try to find like-minded individuals out there who might agree with her on policy, and not try to win policy arguments by building a coalition and a power base. But I don't think that's a very persuasive position for anybody to try to take, particularly, by the way, if you are the backer of a rival for power inside the Democratic Party who uses a leadership PAC. It would, now you're the hypocrite, right? You say, well, you should, because you once said all PACs are evil, you're not allowed to use it ever. I never said PACs were evil, so I get to use it. Well, that's not really the way it works either. I think a better view of things would be to take the partial win, to take yes for an answer, right? I think that this is a totally legitimate use of PACs, and I think that it embodies a totally legitimate way of building power in Washington. Finding like-minded individuals and forming bonds with them, however it is. Sometimes it is over policy. Sometimes it's over money. What can you do? Money is the most easily transferable form of support. You can do whatever it is you need to do in your district. You're the one who knows how to win in your district. The best way for me to support you is with money so that you can do that. Another way, I could come and campaign for you, but that's of limited impact. Money, that too is of limited impact, but it's a much broader range of impacts you can have with it. Money is just the best proxy that we've got, which is, it's why we're a capitalist country. Sorry, that's the irony perhaps of socialists doing it, I suppose. But I don't think socialists are ignorant of the power of capital. They just would like to see it limited, not necessarily in ways that would limit people's ability to build broad political coalitions, but other ways. Anyway, my bigger point here is that people have said that this is going to be, if you want people to take you seriously and you want the Green New Deal not to be mocked by the current Democratic leadership, you can either change the Democratic leadership's mind about your policy, and there are a number of ways to do that, or you can change the leadership. Elect leaders who won't ridicule the Green New Deal. And the way to do that is to play this game. So here she says, you know what, I will opt to be taken seriously. I won't simply yell about the environment and have sit-ins. I will do the things that very serious people say are necessary in order to seriously impact policy here in Washington, D.C. And so she goes and does it. And immediately the people who said, well, that's what you have to do, say, God, she can't do this. This is a hypocrite. You got to stop her somehow. Well, one, you can't. And two, yes, there's a bit of hypocrisy. Now, also, one of the objections was, well, she should admit then that she was wrong about PACs. Well, yeah, I guess. Although, if you really did say all PACs are evil, and then you go and start a PAC, that really is an admission that you were wrong about PACs, don't you think? I think the only other option is I've turned evil, and I don't think that she's going to admit to that. But on the other hand, if you're holding out in this world for, well, I will allow her then to start a PAC, but first she has to come out and make a public statement. I said this about PACs, and I was wrong, and I admit it, and I'm so sorry that I did that, and I'll never attack anybody over PACs again, and then please, pretty please, will I be allowed to start a PAC? That's not going to happen either. You're going to frustrate yourself to death if you're waiting for that to happen. The admission that PACs have a legitimate use and the establishment of the PAC is all you're going to get by way of, I was wrong about that. They're manifesting it by starting the PAC. So take the win and get down to the job of competing with her if you think you would like to rival her for influence in the caucus. I did mention that there are other ways to change the minds of the leadership, and one of them is money, right? If they're not dumb, they can read the proxies, they can read the writing on the wall. If Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez raises $1 bazillion, that's a real number, for her PAC, even before she starts distributing the money, the leadership is going to catch wind of that. And they're going to say, we might find ourselves displaced by this money. One way to remain where we are is to say, we should give that Green New Deal a second look and hope that means that you're not targeted, or that means that the candidates who come into office as a result of support from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's leadership PAC won't be told on their way into the first caucus meeting, yeah, we got to get rid of Pelosi or whoever your target might be, Hoyer or Clyburn for that matter, or Meeks, whatever it is. The hope would be, you'd say, well, she's come around on the Green New Deal, so let's target our fire elsewhere for people who remain strident opponents of the Green New Deal. Now you might think, well, this is all an act and it's just cover so that we don't target her. Well, if you legitimately come to that conclusion, then go ahead, target her. But the leadership, they're no dummies. They see what happens. And if you start a leadership PAC and you raise $69,000 on the first day, and then you don't raise much more, and you have a leadership PAC with under $100,000 in it, you're regarded differently, threat assessment-wise, than you are if you have a leadership PAC with $2.3 million in it. You're a much bigger force. And is it because money rules everything? Yeah, in a way. Not directly necessarily. Why? $2.3 million in a bank account is $2.3 million in a bank account. It changes no minds by itself. What changes minds is other people imagining what you might be doing with that $2.3 million. It's $2.3 million leaving a bank account that is worrisome. Is it going to elect other people who are going to come and vote against me or replace me? Can I compete with that? Do I have $2.3 million that I can use to countervail those effects? Do I want to countervail those effects? But right away, they're able to make that estimate. Is this a person to be taken seriously? And if so, how do we offset that? One way is I got to get $2.3 million and donate to the opposite side of every contest that she involves herself in, but that's not particularly effective. Another way, though, a cheaper way, is to say, you know what, we should give a markup to the Green New Deal and take it seriously. Have I changed the minds of leadership? Maybe, maybe not. But I've changed the outcome, and that's enough. And maybe I have changed the minds of leadership. It's not, I never, the mind of leadership may have said, I never disagreed necessarily with the Green New Deal by itself. I just thought that the process by which we were going to implement it was not particularly wise. I wanted things done differently, or I wanted different components in the Green New Deal, or I did think it was stupid. And I still think it's stupid, but I think I'm going to lose if I fight against it. If I focus on this so closely, I'll be targeted. So I'm going to let it slide. They're going to have their markup. Let's move the bill forward so that people don't get angry at me. That's another way to combat that. I don't know if you've changed their minds deep down, but you got your hearing, so that's enough, if that's what your goal was. You see what I'm saying? I don't know. There's a lot of subtlety involved in all of this, and I think you should take it as a good sign that she's decided to be serious about her policy. You have a lot of people knock her for being a showboat and grabbing headlines, but not making any headway on policy. So now she's trying to make headway on policy, and if she's successful in it, how long you want to curse the darkness, right? Light a candle. Join us in the new chapter. She's going to be playing on the same field as you. You think you're a master of the game? You should have no worries. Go play. If she beats you, what are you going to do? Finally, I guess one last comment I'll make on it. I did see another comment on that thread in which I explained myself and my views on this thing last night. And maybe you should have just read that, and I could have told you about different stories. But we'll get to those stories tomorrow through Friday. But another interesting comment saying, you know what, I agree with this, and I'm a big supporter of AOCs, and I really don't like leadership PACs, but that's the way the game is played in Washington. Maybe what we ought to do is say, look, we are going to compete on this playing field. We're going to level it. We're going to use our fundraising prowess to fight this out. And then when we become the leadership, maybe then we'll say, yeah, you know what? Leadership PACs are bad things. We always thought so. We used one out of necessity, and we're going to ban them going forward as a matter of policy. I'm not sure how that gets done or how whether you succeed. versus a lawsuit against that policy or whatever, or nor do I really know whether anybody has that policy in mind who's in a position to implement it. That, too, is problematic, of course, and I was thinking, that's one way of looking at things. Of course, another way of looking at the same situation is, well, you benefited from this playing field and starting a leadership pack, and you built yourself up from nothing, which is how people are supposed to do it. And you made it to the pinnacle of success, and now you're pulling up the ladder behind you so that no one else can do it. Part of the cycle of this is insurgent freshman or newcomer comes into town, grabs the headlines, uses that to raise money for themselves, finds themselves at loggerheads with the leadership. Back in the day, it was progressives like Alexandria OcasioCortez, but with different names, who found themselves under the leadership of the remnants of the Dixiecrat Party, or ancient chairman who had been in charge of Washington, D.C. for decades and still had a decade left, and didn't, and thought the role of newcomers was to shut up and give me your vote. Reformers came in, they started the leadership packs, they fought, they did the work, they rubber chickened it for decades, they became the Steny Hoyers and, took over. Steny Hoyer was never, super duper progressive, but actually, deep down, if you look at his voting record, he's as solid blue as they come. And very often, very forceful in speaking on behalf of things that happen to be progressive positions, even if he comes to them from a different angle. Anyway, the point is, Nancy Pelosi wasn't born Speaker of the House. She came from a powerful political family, true, but when she came in as a freshman, she was a nothing. But, not nothing. She had been, of course, active in the Democratic National Committee, etc., but in the House, nothing. She had been important in Democratic politics, too, but remember, she came into the Dan Rostenkowski style House of Representatives, where they were like, yep, big deal, the Democratic National Committee. I eat those guys for breakfast. I know what they really do. I'm not that worried about that. She had to work her way up. And she had a head start, true, and others don't, but they do the work. And they get up there. And then what usually ends up happening is they replace the, ossified leadership of the previous era. And then what immediately begins to happen is new people start to get elected. It's taken you 20 years to get to the pinnacle of leadership, 30 years, 40 years in some cases, to the pinnacle of leadership. And along the way, in all that time, somebody else comes in and says, I think that they ought to be doing it a different way, a third way beyond the, not third way, but a different way from the establishment versus the new generation of, the next generation of leadership. So this third generation of leadership starts their own PACs and does the same thing and tries to butt their way in. This is basically what's going to happen, right? So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an amazing success with all of this, finds her way into leadership, finds the way into leadership for other allies, and the squad is now Speaker of the House and Majority Leader and Majority Whip and DCCC Chair, and the DCCC is a wonderful progressive organization now, right? Somebody else comes up along the way and finds themselves at odds for whatever reason, they're going to be sure to be telling us that the leadership is ossified. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been in Congress for 35 years now, and it's time to move on, and we need different leadership. And so, are you going to say that's when you're going to ban, political leadership PACs, pull up the ladder behind you? Is that really a fair thing to do? Is it a democratic thing? Is it a progressive thing to do? It is problematic. Although, as others said, if you're open about that as your policy, look, I'm starting from scratch. I'm starting from nowhere. I am using a leadership PAC because that's the way things are done here. I have big problems with everything revolving around money. Perhaps I would like to operate my leadership PAC slightly differently, take money only from certain people, give money only to certain people. Maybe. Perhaps not. perhaps I just want to do the raw power thing and I don't care. But my intention is, my platform is, we're going to get rid of these things eventually. Well, then everybody knows what they're buying into. If you are interested in taking immediate campaign help and trading it for a vote in caucus to make a person like that leader, knowing that you will never have the opportunity to do that yourself, if you know what you're getting into and you vote that way, go ahead. Nothing I can do to stop you, right? If you're clear about it from the beginning, it's not really as big of a problem. And suppose it is a really big problem. Okay. I feel like a hypocrite, but I got what I wanted, and I wanted to do this thing, and I convinced myself, of course, that everybody would benefit from this thing I wanted to do, the Green New Deal. And you might even be right. Why not? Right? Make it a pure power play and go to your grave regretting that you did this undemocratic thing. But on the other hand, you also did this great thing and, I don't know, saved the planet or humanity or both. If you're lucky. Is it a fair trade? I think so. All right. Well, that's it. I've occupied the entire hour with that somehow, and I hope that it was of interest to you. Some of you will find it to be review, but I think it was worth our time. It's not going to be a pivotal issue in the atmosphere of impeaching a president, possibly going to war with Iran, the president habitually lying about everything and getting caught, the inability of our mainstream media, at least in the form of our ridiculous Sunday talk shows, to deal with how serious the situation is and actually educate people, and that maybe it's time to end these stupid shows. Maybe there are up-and-comers on the minor networks who belong in the major networks until the time comes when they become the ossified establishment and we have to replace them. And the cycle repeats itself. The dance continues, as someone once said. All right. We are, of course, butting up against the end of the show because I wanted to talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and leadership PACs and what they mean, because I think they're so important. An important aspect, the evil of money, yes, but also the importance of building coalitions and making headway on policy, and how it really happens in the dirty, dirty, filthy, disgusting world where money rules everything, because money is portable and can be exchanged for anything you want in any combination or any number of combinations of ways that you want it. And that's why we're a capitalist society. We give preference to capital versus other stakes that can be put up in the various games that we play, because capital is the most adaptable and the most easily transferred. We favor it legally, and that's what makes us capitalist. Not necessarily a difference there between capitalism and socialism per se. I think the two can be probably reconciled. Anyway, we'll spend the rest of our week catching up with the rest of those stories and more. We're going to try and make a shift around here to Tuesdays. That would be tomorrow. Tuesdays for Joan McCarter. As it turns out, her schedule on Wednesdays is filling up, and I think this spreads things out nicely. Greg isn't here on Tuesday. We're lonely. It'd be a nice time to hear from Joan, and not so crowded feeling sometimes if we have both of them on Wednesday. Gives everybody room to breathe. So we'll try. I'll try and remember to remind her to come on Tuesday if she wants to start doing that this week. So that's an exciting new development. Wednesday, of course, we no reason not to believe we wouldn't be live on Wednesday this week. Nothing stands in our way at the moment. So we'll visit again with Greg. We'll talk about any number of interesting stories that we missed today. It might be a good idea at this point to take a quick look around at what Justice Putnam plans for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I'll bet then I'll know what to do in the next couple of days based on what he covers for us today in our deficiency and talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for so long. Well, here's what he's got. Hey, look, it's about Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. Everybody's talking about Mark Esper. He knows he couldn't say to Congress what Trump said to Fox News. And it really was an interesting weekend this weekend, wasn't it? It was relatively quiet, even though Trump didn't shut up for the weekend. He didn't play golf and ghost the way he usually does, and he was actually out there anger tweeting. I think just people are getting more used to not talking about it for all that long, which maybe is good and healthy. Anyway, on the rest of the menu with Justice Putnam here, Trump wants to expand his travel ban to even more countries. Hey, maybe Saudi Arabia this time. Wisconsin dairy farmers suffer a massive blow thanks to Trump's trade war. And a new lawsuit would make it easier to finally pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And by the way, that will be fought right here in Virginia, for starters. One of the few states that never did ratify it and probably still could. And Julie Briskman, now a member of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, made a motion in her first meeting for a resolution in support of its passage here in Virginia. So just a little fun bit of progress on that. After Justice's break, the Chef's Table features Iran issuing more visas to the Canadian team who are probing the airliner and helping families. That's what an actually open, honest government would do, even though they're not an open and honest government. It's a good act. Well done there.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
And meanwhile, over in Iran, Britain, France, and Germany are urging Iran to stick to the 2015 nuclear deal, even though we have pulled out of it. That might be something that they are interested in taking up. They're going to end up looking a lot better in front of the international community than we do, and they shot down an airliner. Amazing. We'll be back tomorrow. See you.